It was almost 20 years after my first day at work that I discovered that my new boss had been almost as nervous as I was. The first Wednesday in August is the day a freshly hatched batch of new junior doctors arrives on the wards in the UK. And it's also the day that the hospitals brace themselves to protect their their patients from their inexperience. And it was my very first day of work as Dr. Meeten. The morning had been spent crying into the front of my husband's t-shirt saying, I'm scared, they can't make me go. But unfortunately they could make me go, because my job for the next 6 months was to take my place as the least confident, most ill-equipped member of the medical team. And the learning curve ahead of me was more like a cliff face, and I was a skin bag of nerves and adrenaline. So there I was, day one, with my freshly starched white coat pockets laden with the essential tools of the job, a drug formulary the size of a small Bible, the yellow Oxford Handbook of Clinical Medicine, and the pager, which was to become my new Lord and Master. I had an overwhelming sense of dread, churning guts, and a tension headache, all by 8:30 a.m. Come on, girl. Big breath, fake smile. I walked on to Ward 4. All eyes turned, and I was suddenly incredibly conscious of trying to walk like a normal human being. My boss, Dr. Brennan, was at the centre of a huddle of medical staff. He was tall with a cyclist frame, a neat beard, and wearing the doctor uniform of chinos and a smart white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No coats for the senior staff. His eyes kind, he introduced me to the rest of my new team, and I tried to file away their names and their roles for future, wondering who was going to be a friend, who was going to be an ally. They all seemed to have a calm confidence that I could only dream of. We junior doctors were so ill-equipped, so full of nerves and imposter syndrome, a bunch of 20-somethings freshly out of university and used to being high achievers, but all of a sudden, the very bottom of the hospital food chain. Those were the good old days, pre-European Working Time Directive, so we were working 70 hours a week, sleeping 1 or 2 hours in 24, often under a desk, or if we could find a recently vacated patient bed. I hated almost every moment, drinking vodka in the morning after a night shift and fantasizing about how to crash the car in a way that would mean I was off sick but wouldn't die. The kinder nurses treated us with patience, and the nurse ratchet types were slightly more sadistic in their approach. There was one nurse who would take delight in sending us to review the elderly man with dementia who'd regressed to his former days as a bit of a Lothario, and you'd have to be quick with a backwards leap to avoid his surprisingly grabby hands. I was once fast-paged to the resuscitation area in A&E to review somebody called Amanda Hug and Kiss, to be met with a burly male emergency room nurse saying, "Here I am, darling, Amanda Hug and Kiss," which was probably hilarious, but not at 2 a.m. I narrowly avoided killing an elderly patient by overprescribing morphine. A nurse asking gently, "Can I clarify the dose here, doctor?" saved my skin that time, and more importantly, the patient's. I pronounced deaths, so many dead bodies for a 22-year-old to see, each one someone's father or wife or child. And at the beginning, I'd cry with the relatives, but by the end, I was so numbed that they were just another task on the list. The dark humour of the doctor's mess would keep us going, with endless coffees and biscuits in a scrappy room reminiscent of a youth hostel with brown and orange leatherette chairs pouring foam stuffing from their holes and a broken TV. Our downtime was constantly interrupted by the bleeps of our pagers, cannulas needing recited, admissions arriving, or patients needing urgent review. And the most terrifying of all was the strident noise of the cardiac arrest page that the duty doctor carried. This one would scream the site of the emergency at you. "Cardiac arrest, ward 8, cardiac arrest, ward 8. You want to get to those calls quickly, but not be first on the scene, as that means you then have to run the arrest, which was something we juniors dreaded more than anything else. I remember one charming anaesthetic doctor yelling at us as we flew down the corridor, "Run faster, they're going to be dead." Helpful. The trick was to arrive out of breath enough to look as though you'd made a decent effort, but not need resuscitation yourself, and not be in charge of anything important. So when that pager went off, the doctor's mess would resound with a chorus designed to express solidarity and support. And it went a little something like this: "Cardiac arrest, ward 8, shite!" I've no idea how that started, probably with the rugby lads in the junior doctor team, but that battle cry of "shite" was strangely comforting. It just didn't look very good when the emergency bleep went off in the cafe. But I survived, with some stories to tell and a little bit more self-belief, and almost all of my patients did as well. And through it all, Dr. Brennan was a constant source of calm. He seemed to know everything about everything and have a sixth sense about medical diagnoses. And time again, as we did our rounds, I'd feel safer when he was in charge. Like some kind of serene medical guru, he had limitless patience for the team he led. And if he picked up on my terror and overwhelming sense of inadequacy, he was kind enough never to reference it. I wanted to be him when I grew up, just maybe without the beard. So flashing forward to this April, when my daughter developed a cough and a high temperature. Of course it was the COVID until proven otherwise, so I phoned in sick and contacted the helpline to arrange a test. A wee bit later on, we drove up to a gazebo round the back of a hospital where a fully equipped nurse in PPE stuck a swab through the car window, up her wee nose and round her tonsils, and we headed back home to await our fate. Well, the phone rang the next day with a familiar voice at the other end. It was Dr. Brennan, now retired from the NHS, but drafted in to work with the public health team during the pandemic. And he'd recognised my name from the olden days on the form and taken the call himself. So we reminisced for a few minutes about those late 90s days in the ward and realised at the time he was probably the same age I am now, a fairly new consultant leading a team which relied on him. I blurted out, "I was so nervous the whole time, I'd cry every day." I don't know why I felt the need to confess after all these years. Maybe it was just the surprise of hearing his voice, or maybe it was the relief that Emily didn't have the COVID. But out it poured. We were no longer boss and very junior, just a couple of old colleagues catching up. I could hear the smile in his voice as he replied with an answer that was either incredibly reassuring or a tiny bit terrifying. "Can I let you into a secret?" he said. "Me too." So it turns out that sometimes even our heroes are just trying to hide the nerves and act like they know what they're doing.
Thanks very much, Gyda. That's fantastic. It's always good to hear stories from you from across the water in Scotland. I don't think I've told too many people this, but I used to want to be a doctor when I was younger, and I didn't get into medicine. I mean, I'm much better writing poems about blood than I am imagining blood. So I think it's a good thing for the world that I never got into medicine. But it took me a few years to figure out what I was going to do. And so I got a job as a cleaner in the operating theatre in one of the hospitals in Cork City. And I hated the job. I just despised it. It confirmed to me that I never would have been a good doctor or nurse or anything. And I one day was given a bag of human waste, bits and pieces that had been taken out from a body. And I was supposed to put it down the incinerator chute because the operating theatres were on top of the hospital. And there were two chutes. There was the incinerator chute and there was the laundry chute. And yeah, I sent body bits down a laundry chute. I don't think I've told anybody that. 25 years ago that I did that. And yeah, I'm sure I gave some poor person working in the laundry in the basement the pride of their life. Yeah, and the awful thing was that I was such a good living person at the time. When I sent that down, I said, "Fuck!" And I felt more guilty that I'd sworn than the fact that I'd sent human bits down the laundry chute. So there we are. I'm sure you've never done anything like that.
Never. No. Too many forms to fill in.
Oh Lord. Anyway, I'm very glad to hear your daughter didn't have the COVID, and I hope you and all of them are very safe.